Unit 4, Task 1 is way different from the previous Task 1 assignments that we've seen. We've seen line graphs, bar charts, pie charts, but you can also get a process diagram, like some kind of industrial process, or it could be a natural life cycle, like the life cycle of a plant. It could be the life cycle of a creature. So this is quite similar to a lot of other prompts that we've seen. For example, hydroelectric power plant, right? It's got a lot of the exact same elements. So the type of power plant doesn't matter too much. All the information that you need is always in the diagram. So let's talk about this for a second. Okay, so this diagram shows how electricity is produced in a nuclear power station. So I'll just give you a minute to look at the diagram. If you have any questions about what this is or how it works, please ask.
So from where to start?
That's right, where to begin. Is there any way, with this kind of diagram, if possible, see if you can figure out any way to group any of these elements together? Yeah, so this definitely looks like one group, this containment structure. The turbine, could you connect the turbine to anything else?
Steam generator and the electricity
or the electric generator, right? The turbine and the electric generator, I think it's easy to put this together because the electricity is actually made right here.
Yeah.
Between the turbine and the electric generator, and then it's delivered over high voltage power lines. And then what about all this stuff here?
The water.
There's a process involving water.
Okay.
This water is actually used to cool renewable fuel, whatever is there in the steam generator. And then this water goes back to the reservoir.
Sorry, it's very hard to hear you. It's very quiet.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me now? Oops, sorry.
I've got my volume up all the way, almost. It's very quiet.
Hello, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Oh, actually, I was saying that is water is used to cool down that steam generator, that uranium fuel, whatever it is used in steam generator, and then water is then pumped back to the reservoir.
Yep. Now, keep in mind that this particular diagram is a little bit different than other ones that we've seen. Now, I want you to notice that here, this cooling water that goes in, it doesn't connect with this water. Okay, this is a closed cycle. This is only for cooling. The reason would be is that they wouldn't want this water, which is interacting with the uranium fuel, necessarily from interacting with the water that's going into the environment.
So the uranium fuel, the water, from where it's getting water then?
It's a closed system. It's the water's getting cooked here. Just this is like a kettle, basically. And the steam comes out. The steam blasts onto the turbine and spins it. And then the steam kind of starts to cool and lose power. So it condensates and it returns to a liquid state. And then it just gets recycled and it goes back into this steam generator. So this water is recycled. This stuff here is just the cooling process. In this water, it gets, it's sent to the cooling tower for cooling, and then new water comes in.
What's the purpose of new water if it's a closed circuit?
So the cooling water is not a closed circuit, it's an open circuit. The water that goes into the containment structure and the steam generator, that's a closed circuit, it seems. I'm sure they add water to it, but this seems to be a closed process. This is, like a radiator. Some people have radiators at home. So this is like a radiator, roughly speaking, but a radiator that functions as a cooling unit rather than a warming unit.
So, sir, don't you think these kind of diagrams are difficult to describe? Like, if you don't have a knowledge, so I think it is like you can write an essay by seeing the diagrams or the patterns, but describing this kind of a diagram is, I think, it is difficult.
This is identical to the ones that IELTS produces. So their expectation is that this is the kind of stuff you would have learned in high school. This shouldn't be beyond the comprehension level of anyone taking the academic exam, right? Like they do the water cycle, they do hydroelectric power generation. You don't need any specific background knowledge to understand how this works. Like this is a diagram meant for kids.
Then why we are taking too much time to understand this?
Because yes.
Here's the thing. The average score on IELTS writing is really low worldwide. The main reason for that is lack of preparation. There's no, like, you shouldn't need to prepare for this exam, but the fact is you do. You have to look at a lot of these past models. You have to look at a lot of examples and a lot of model answers so that when you walk into the exam, it's not a surprise.
Okay.
Right.
But I like diagrams better than the numbers.
I think numbers are better than the diagrams.
You know, I guess the diagrams are better than numbers.
I think you're only saying you like the numbers better because because the first 3 units dealt with numbers. So you've gotten used to those. And now you're out of your comfort zone.
No, I don't like numbers. I like diagrams better.
Personal preference. Anyway, this business here in the middle, don't worry about that. This is not going to have a significant impact on how you describe this. Okay. Basically, every power plant is the same. You have a heat source, which produces steam. The steam drives a turbine. The turbine is connected to an electric generator, and that's where the electricity comes from. So this could be a big windmill connected here to the turbine. It could be water falling down, like when we have hydroelectric power. If you had a coal-fired power plant, it would just be coal here instead of uranium, right? So the only thing that is ever different in a power plant is the fuel, right? The fuel is different. You need fuel to create steam to drive the turbine. If you don't want to use a fuel, then you have to use kinetic energy, right? Like either falling water or a spinning windmill blade.
Jan, but it needs the water to produce electricity, right? It's the water that is needed to produce electricity. It needs to be taken from in this case, from the cool water source.
The water isn't producing the electricity. The water is being transformed into steam, which at high pressure is being shot at the turbine, causing it to spin. The steam is just under pressure. The function of the steam is to create like a wind, right? To blow the turbine and get it to spin.
Oh.
Like this is extremely high pressure steam. If you don't want to use high pressure steam, then a windmill, a wind turbine works exactly the same way, just under
Now
low
I got
pressure,
it.
right?
Okay, okay.
Or imagine if you've got a waterfall, the water is just falling onto this turbine, and it's gravity basically that's spinning this thing.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. I was thinking in a waterfall that they put in science things. Yeah. Okay. Now I got it. Why is not okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and we can follow the arrows also. If we can see the cooling water is going through this containment structure. This water,
Mhm.
cool water source. The water is going to the containment structure,
It's
and
not.
from
It's not.
arrow. If we follow the arrow, small arrows in the blue, this thing.
Yeah, so the arrows go here. If you can see
Hmm.
my mouse, it goes here. And then
Yeah.
this arrow, look, it's a closed system.
And what about this arrow? Then the before water pump inside this pipeline.
Yeah,
These
so this water goes like this, and then it produces steam. So this is the same water. It goes through the turbine,
mm-hmm.
and then it comes down and it goes into this condenser unit. And then it comes
The thing
back out
coming
again.
down is actually steam. That is the thing, that is steam is coming down, which is being condensed into the water.
Yes. So the
In the
steam comes
condenser.
down,
Mm.
it gets condensed, exactly as Shamri said. It turns back into its liquid form, and then it just gets recycled.
Okay.
Imagine it's like it's as if you boiled your kettle and then had some kind of hood on top of it to capture the steam and turn it back into water.
Yeah, that's distillation process.
Yeah, if you've got a steam distiller, that's what it's doing.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Arrow confused me because same arrow it was going. There should be more arrows to show that it's within the like this pipe. You see? Okay, I got it now.
Don't worry too much about being super precise about this. All you need to say is that after the steam leaves the turbine, it goes into the condenser where what happens in the condenser?
It
Cool down.
cools down.
Cools down and it
Water.
re-enters the containment structure.
Got it.
Okay, and then
And
separately
the
you can
rest of it,
yeah, and then
goes to the cooling tower.
you can just be careful with how you describe it, but yeah, you can say the water that's in the condenser or the water that's used to cool down the steam then warms up and it's sent to the cooling tower to cool off.
So the cool water source is the running water from where they are taking the water.
Yeah.
And
So
then in the
nuclear
cooling
power,
tower, it is cooling and then it will go into the condenser.
yeah, so if you, for example, the Pickering nuclear power plant, which is, I can almost see it from my house. If I actually walk down to the lake, I can see Pickering. It's got it's right on the water's edge. And that's because they need this huge source of cool water to cool down the whole process. Right, and you see these huge cooling towers, and that's to take the heat out of this system because they need to remove heat from this water because the whole thing would overheat.
So from the cooling tower, the water is coming, going where?
The steam goes into the cooling tower, not the
Yeah.
water. Steam goes into the cooling tower.
Yes, but when it goes into cooling tower, it turns into liquid, isn't it?
No, it turns into steam and it leaves like a cloud. This is why this is a closed system. This water that's coming from the natural source isn't supposed to touch the water that's going through the containment structure.
But if the steam is again coming and mixing with the same water, it will contaminate.
The steam is not mixing.
The red dots there are not showing the mixing of the.
See, let me see if I can draw on this. I can. Okay. This water goes in here and it stays in this system. And then the steam just goes out. And then constantly new water comes in from the fresh water source, from the cool water source. All right, so it's constantly bringing in cool water, and this cool water is removing the heat from this other water. This water that's going in here, it's getting boiled, and then the steam is getting shot into the turbine.
So from where this water is coming? The starting point of this water.
It's a closed source. If this is a closed system, then none of the steam is escaping, and it just stays inside the system. And after it's powered the turbine, it just goes into here, and then it comes back. If it's
So how
inside
about
that.
steam? Steam is not radioactive?
Yeah, but the steam is, this steam that's in here, it never leaves the closed system. When it condensates, it condensates in this vessel, where it's cooled down by this cool fresh water, that's the red line. But these water sources don't need to touch each other.
Okay.
Because this cool water, it's like an air conditioning unit. You know, when you touch the pipes, they're very cold.
Yeah.
So the gas in the air conditioning unit makes the metal pipes very cold, and the coldness of those pipes cools down the surrounding air. But the surrounding air never actually interacts with that freezing cold gas that's inside the pipes. This is the exact same thing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
But now, now come to the point how to describe this.
We've gone off the deep end. you don't need to worry too much about all this, but it helps to understand, because if you really have no idea, like that's a very good point that you bring up. If you really have absolutely no idea how a power plant works, this is going to be impossible.
Yep.
So in a sense, this is not supposed to be a subject examination. It's only supposed to be an English examination. But the fact is, if you don't know this, like anything about this stuff, this is unbelievably hard. And that's why you have to attend a class.
Yep.
Right? So you have exposure to all these prompts, then you start to see the similarities and you start to pick up the patterns. Like basically the type of power generation that we're talking about doesn't matter too much. All the different types of power generation have a very, very similar process. The only thing that's different is one is like a nuclear power plant has a containment structure, but like we mentioned previously, this might be a waterfall instead, like when you have a hydroelectric dam. So this is going to be different. If it were a gas power plant or a coal-powered power plant, it would be basically the same thing. The only thing that's different in those examples is the fuel source. So let's look at a model for this. The illustration shows how a nuclear power station makes electricity. From an overall perspective, it can be seen that electricity production is a complex process that requires a number of steps involving the generation of steam, the production of electricity, and the water circulation process. Okay, so it's been divided into, all the parts have been divided into 3 groups. Electricity generation starts in the containment building, where uranium fuel is heated to generate steam. From here, The steam travels through pipes until it reaches a turbine, causing it to spin. The turbine's movement powers a generator, and as a result, electricity is produced. This electricity is transferred via the power grid to end users. Notice it goes really fast, it's really short. These ones tend to be shorter than graphs, than anything involving numbers. Just through years of experience, it's often hard to get these over 150. Okay, last part. Meanwhile, the steam that had spun the generator is returned to a condenser. Here, the steam cools down and is pumped back to the containment building. That's this thing. At the same time, the condenser draws in fresh water for cooling. As the cooling water heats up, it is transported through more pipes to cooling towers, where it is released as steam. The end. That's it. So we didn't even talk about the separation of the water supplies not mixing together. That's not really relevant. It's just it's interesting to know how these things work. Okay, so it's not necessary to talk about that for the purpose of this exercise. Now, something I wanted to talk about, and we haven't discussed this in a long time, just in terms of good writing and in terms of writing flow. I want to point out how the ends of sentences flow into the beginnings of the following sentences. Electricity generation starts in the containment building where uranium fuel is heated to generate steam. Steam is the last thing. Generating steam is the last thing in this sentence. From here, the steam, it's the first thing in the next sentence, travels through pipes until it reaches a turbine, causing it to spin. So the turbine spinning is the end of this sentence. Beginning of next sentence. The turbine's movement powers a generator, and as a result, electricity is produced. That's the end of this sentence, the production of electricity. This electricity is transferred via the power grid to end users. Okay. This is one of the keys of making writing flow. How you end a sentence is very often the best way to begin the next sentence, especially when it's a process. Okay. Meanwhile, the steam that had spun the generator is returned to a condenser. Here, that's in the condenser, the steam cools down and is pumped back to the containment building. Okay, but here we have to, it goes in two directions. So there's like a break here. At the same time, that's why we use this transition, the condenser draws in fresh water for cooling. As the cooling water heats up, so this is the fresh water for cooling is the end of that sentence, and it's the beginning of the next. As the cooling water heats up, it's transported through more pipes to cooling towers, where it is released as steam. Okay, and this whole thing is 160 words. Okay, so a few of you are new and you probably haven't heard me talk about this process. So the ideal process for learning how to write, I mean, writing is hard. There's no doubt about it. The fact that writing is the lowest score on IELTS, that's not a surprise. The best process that we've been able to come up with for helping people learn how to write is basically the same process that professionals use, the people who want to teach themselves how to write use. Step 1, read the Band 9 model carefully. Step 2, I would complete the grammar exercises, the ones above. And we're going to do those in just a few minutes, just so everyone has a chance to do them, and so that I can show you that they don't take a long time. I think people see that there's 3 exercises like, oh my God, oh no, I have to do all this other stuff. They're only going to take you a few minutes. One thing I want to mention, and I'm going to mention it over and over again, is that there is no efficient way to learn how to write properly. Efficiency and education do not go together that well, because you're not a computer. This is not the Matrix where we can, like, you know, download how to fly a helicopter in 5 seconds and then be proficient at flying a helicopter. It just doesn't work that way. Okay, next step. So the first step, we call it modeling. Tons and tons and tons of writers have learned to write this way. This is how I learned to write. When I was in high school, it was my goal to become a novelist. And probably like many an aspiring novelist, I ended up becoming an English teacher instead. Okay. When I wanted to learn how to write, I would take books written by my literary heroes, and I would just copy out passages that I really loved. I had notebooks, tons and tons of notebooks, little notebooks that I would keep with me at all times. And whenever I saw something that was really cool, I would write it down. The act of writing it down causes you to internalize those structures because you're saying it to yourself. You're writing it down. There's a strong hand-brain connection. Lots of writers have actually taken books by their heroes, placed them next to their typewriter, and just copied out the full book word for word. Okay, hundreds of pages. They just copied it manually, word for word, in order to get a really strong feeling. And I'm using the word feeling on purpose. A really strong feeling for the original writer's style, the sentence structure, the vocabulary choices, the grammatical choices. The third step, I'm just going to call it the Ben Franklin approach, because a lot of people bring up Ben Franklin, and this is how he taught himself how to write. By the age of 12, he was responsible for publishing a newspaper in his older brother's publishing company. Nobody taught him how to write. He taught himself how to write by taking essays, and then he would summarize the essays in point form. He would put away the original, and he would write his own version of the essay based on his point form notes. This means that the two are easy to compare, because when you create an outline based on an original work, you're essentially copying down the information and the order of the information. Then when you make your own version of that, your version and the original version have the same content and the same structure. What's different is the delivery, your word choice versus the original word choice. So the process is basically reverse engineer a model, make a point form outline, and then write your own version based on the outline, and compare and critique. Okay, so you look at the original, you look at yours, and you compare the language. This is about awareness raising. You have to look carefully at the way the original writer described some phenomenon. Look at the way you described it, and just ask yourself, which one's better? Which one's more accurate? Which one sounds better? Next step is you post your writing for me to check. In many cases, I will give you follow-up exercises based on the mistakes that I find. and then revise your work. And I'll check it again. Okay. So by this point, you have read and analyzed that original model how many times? Once, 3 times in step 2, the 5th time for step 3, and then you've done your own version a couple times. So you've read that original at least 5 times, and that's the point. Right? You don't learn how to do something by looking at something once. You have to look at it several times from different perspectives. Here, the first time you're reading it, you're just reading it for the information. Then you read it more carefully as you're modeling it. You're saying it out loud. You're writing it. When you do the grammar exercises, the first one, you're focusing on the articles. The second one, you're focusing on conjugation. So here it's verbs, it's participles. The third one, you're focusing on complex sentences. But these are all taken from the model. So you're seeing that content again and again and again, and you're doing a deep dive into the grammatical constructions. Okay, then you put everything away and you do your own version. And you'll notice that a lot of this stuff that you picked up in the first 3 steps is stuck in your head where it's supposed to be. And then you're practicing applying it. I'm not saying that your writing should be a carbon copy of the original. I'm not telling you to memorize the first one. I'm not telling you to memorize the model. That's not the goal here. The goal here is for a lot of those elements, the language, the grammar, the sentence structure, to get stuck in you, in your head. And then many of those elements will come out when you do your own version. Parts of it will be very unique. Parts of it will be identical to the original. Parts of it will be a mix of what you saw in the original plus your own ideas. Right, then I check it and then you revise. Rinse and repeat repeatedly. Okay, let's do these exercises and let me show you where they are.